What common knowledge went way over everyone's head? That there are no tigers in Africa. I was on safari in Tanzania, and two others in the truck were discussing how excited they would be to see tigers. I told them there weren't any, and they looked all disbelieving and crestfallen, like I was spoiling their fun. They had to check with the guide. I have a twin sister. I'm a guy. You'd be surprised how often I get asked if we're identical. Do you say, no, her Johnson is bigger? Started working as a service plumber, and I can't believe how many people are surprised when you say don't put grease down the drain. That's something I grew up with. The mason jar under the sink where you dumped the grease out of the pan. Too many people don't know that it shouldn't go down the drain. Okay, so some frequently asked questions. Number 1. What does grease do to my pipes? Grease, fats, and oils stick to the side and solidify. This causes the inside diameter to decrease and leaves behind a sticky, uneven surface that stuff can't slide over easily. This is especially bad if you use a garbage disposal. Question 2. What do I do with the grease if I can't dump it down the drain? Trash or a jar? Some people save it for cooking, some use a jar to prevent their trash from smelling, some simply dump it outside in their yard. Wipe the pan with a paper towel to further decrease what goes down the drain. Question 3. What about toilets? Crap and crap paper, nothing else. No wipes, not even the flushable ones, are safe. No tampons, no pads, no diapers, no Johnnies. And finally, does hot water help? Not nearly as much as you think. Enough hot water will flush out almost anything, and liquid soap can help too, but in my opinion, it's easier and faster to just use a jar or the trash. I'm not sure how much our viewers are learning from this, but the narrator is getting loads of what are apparently just common sense facts of life. Now I know I shouldn't just be tipping all of my oil down the sink and should maybe get a plumber to check my pipes. So growing up, I always saw the videos of sea turtles or other animals suffering, disfigured, or killed by plastic soda holder rings not being cut before being thrown out. This, of course, stuck with me, and so when I worked in a hospital kitchen, I'd collect the rings from the soda restock on the shift and simply slice each ring. One day my coworker asked why I did that. I explained, and he just stood there for a moment and went, I never thought of that. My mind was blown. I thought it was common knowledge that these things really jacked up wildlife. He then proceeded to tell all of our coworkers, and I was further shocked that over half of them also didn't seem to know that this was an issue. Apparently, a lot of people don't know that pickles come from cucumbers. I've seen a lot of comments like this on Reddit. They're called pickles, as in pickled cucumber. My friend is also allergic to cucumbers. She ordered a sandwich and told the girl she had a cucumber allergy, and she got pickles in her sandwich and an extra on the plate. We were like, we said no cucumbers, and the waitress said, I know, that's a pickle. When I was a kid, I thought that when people got hurt, it was normal to get a shot, like a syringe. Turns out I have hemophilia, and my mum was really good at making me not feel like I was different. I used to work at a grocery store with a floral and gift department. We also handled balloons. Helium was going through a shortage at the time, and as a retail supplier, we were on lower priority from medical and military purchases. So there was about an 8-month period where we were completely out of helium. I had some version of this conversation at least 4 times. Can I get some party balloons, please? I can blow you up some balloons, but they won't float. Why not? We're out of helium at the moment. Why can't you just use air? I can use that, but they won't float. Why not? No helium. About 5 seconds of stupid face and silence followed by, what's helium? That dogs chase animals. I see so many people giving away their dogs because they're chasing my chickens. They're prey-driven animals. That's literally what most of them were made to do. How mummies were made. Growing up, I was obsessed with ancient Egypt and mummies. Even better, my dad worked as a mortician and would casually tell me how the things they did prevented decay. I wound up doing a presentation in 2nd grade about the process. I couldn't understand why I got sent to the counselor after that. Funnily enough, I'm now in school for archaeology and going on a dig soon. Seriously? I read a ton of books when I was a kid that went into excruciating detail about the mummification process. They know kids love that crap. The geography of the world. I was shocked that a lot of people in my campus thought that Singapore was in Europe. One of my friends thought Mexico was in Europe. I made fun of her all day. Then she recalled the time I said the Nile was in Africa, and with a very serious tone she said, "The Nile is in Egypt, idiot." That the moon can be visible in the daytime. Like, how can you go through life never noticing that? I had this conversation with my mother-in-law. My 2-year-old son said, "Noon," pointing to the sky, and I translated for him, and my mother-in-law says, "Silly boy, the moon is only out at night." Her face was priceless, like he didn't know the words, but he looked at her like, "Okay, but counterpoint, it's right there." Indian is not a language. In India, we have 30+ major languages and hundreds of local dialects. A pony is not a baby horse. I see this revelation a few times a year on the internet. A baby horse is a foal. A pony is a small horse, typically a few different breeds. As a general rule, if an animal's proportions are the same as a full-sized version, you're looking at a small adult, not a child. You can spot a baby horse or foal because they're super gangly and awkward, just like human teenagers. How to use an apostrophe. It's disturbingly common for people to automatically add in an apostrophe when they pluralize a word. Don't put laundry softener in your towel load. The towels will retain it and be unable to absorb water properly. If you've done this already, you may need to wash your towels several times without softener to get it all out. That just because someone speaks a different language, it doesn't mean they're deaf or hard of hearing. Speak slower? Absolutely. Speak 50 decibels louder than normal? Unnecessary. The universal English-speaking tourist symptom. Getting angry that people aren't understanding you and just saying the same thing louder and louder until you're red in the face. "Where can I get some chips, mate?" The print screen button on the keyboard takes a screenshot and loads it into the clipboard. That narwhals aren't really a thing. My parents thought I'd read some fake online article because in what world would a unicorn whale exist? After a few minutes of looking it up on their own, they realized that these weird creatures are in fact real, and their horn is actually one giant tooth or tusk. They can sometimes have two. That reduce, reuse, recycle is an order of operations, not just a phrase. That girls should tinkle after doing the deed. My roommate just got a UTI, and when asked if she peed after doing it, she asked why would she do that. Basic human anatomy. My wife thought that the berries resided directly to the left and right of the twig in male anatomy, like engines on a jet plane. Chickens lay eggs without a rooster being around to breed them. It's weird how many people don't know this. That you have to wash your butt in the shower and put on deodorant every day to keep from smelling like a swamp in the summer. Mixing 2 common household cleaners, bleach and ammonia, makes chloramine gas. I saw some memes saying to mix them as it makes a super cleaner, and I hope that no one bought into it. Warning label. So to add how dangerous this is, chloramine gas is lethal. Breathing it in causes irritation in the lungs and will cause chemical pneumonia. This isn't like breathing in car exhaust and just passing out and not being alive anymore. This hurts a lot. And while I've got your attention, another similar thing people do is running engines and generators in garages. Gas is the invisible killer. The Pelican Man. I used to visit my grandparents' place in Sarasota, Florida as a kid. There was a bird sanctuary there run by the Pelican Man, a bird rehabilitator who had minor fame in the Sarasota metro area. I idolized him. One day when I was about 18, I got to meet him and talk to him. I was over the moon starstruck by him. I was so excited to go home to North Carolina and tell the other kids in my class all about how I met the Pelican Man and how he talked to me. I thought they'd react as if I'd gotten to meet Britney Spears or Harrison Ford. I remember feeling really deflated when I was just met with blank stares because no one outside of Sarasota knew who he was. I should note that his facility closed after his death in the early 2000s, but has since reopened with the same aim of education and bird rehabilitation under the name of Save Our Seabirds. If you're in Sarasota, definitely pay it a visit, and you can read about the Pelican Man himself on their website. Prom is from promenade. Is that like lemonade? That the misuse of antibiotics is a legitimate issue. My girlfriend told me that she never finished her prescriptions because they give her extras, and then if she's feeling sick in the future, she'll take the extras. If you don't finish antibiotics, you're helping create drug-resistant bacteria. Every time I mention the fact that you can get ebooks and audiobooks online through your library, via Libby or Overdrive or some other borrowing services depending on what your library signed up for, there's always someone who's getting it as knowledge for the first time and is amazed. It's a great service, but they do a really bad job of advertising it. Catholicism is Christian. That Puerto Rico is part of the United States. Just for comparison, New Mexico license plates used to read New Mexico, USA because so many people thought they weren't from the US. Toasters have a tray at the bottom that you can remove to clean the breadcrumbs out. I knew about this, but I also never clean it. When driving, there's something in between gassing and braking. You can coast to let the car drag and slow a little before turns, exits, or to merge into slower traffic. That birth control being 99% effective doesn't mean you'll get pregnant 1 out of 99 times doing the deed. It means that, on average, if 100 couples do the deed for 1 year, then one of them will get pregnant. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I live in the Midwest around a lot of farmers and country folk. A whole bunch of us went out for a friend's birthday the night before Easter. The bar was playing one of those Charlton Heston movies where he was portraying Jesus, and I made a comment to my boyfriend about how I found it funny that everyone in the movie was white, considering this story takes place in the Middle East supposedly some 2,000 years ago. One of the guys in our group whipped around like someone just told him a nuclear bomb went off, and was like, "What do you mean? Of course Jesus was white. Haven't you seen all the paintings in church?" The long and short of it, I had to explain and show him that different cultures portray Jesus in the skin tone of their choosing, when in reality, if he existed, he was probably pretty dark-complexioned dude. I'm pretty sure I ruined this guy's night. Browsing the threads of Twitter has revealed to the narrator all too many times that there are many, many people who cling to Jesus being white like it's the one thing keeping their lives together, and react aggressively to any claim otherwise, despite the fact that it doesn't change the contents or lessons of the good book one iota. They should probably think about why it makes them so angry. It doesn't matter. Woo boy, I'm a nutritionist and work in retail, so I have hundreds of these. It was a steep learning curve being exposed to the public that made me realize things I thought were glaringly obvious really aren't. So, a list of the ones that stick out to me right now. That oil is fat. I've honestly had customers say they take oil as a protein supplement or ask if oil has carbs. That fruit has both sugar and carbohydrates. That calories can only come from carbs, protein, or fat, and alcohol. Like all food is made up of those three things. That's it. That's the only options. That nutrients come from food, and that's the whole point of eating. Customers often think they can do crappy meal replacement shakes or 500-cal non-food diets for months at a time and wonder how they get deficient in basic nutrients like iron or magnesium. That fish oils come from fish. Yes, I'm serious, people ask me this all the time. That flour is made of ground-up grains. And my personal favorite, that Himalaya is not a country. My customer will say, "I need Himalayan pink salt." I say, "Sure, it's just in this bulk bin here." It says this is from Pakistan. Do you have one from Himalaya? The Himalaya are mountain ranges that stretch across a few countries, including Pakistan, where the salt is mined. Oh, are you really sure? I stare into the camera like The Office. That the word scuba is actually an acronym. Also, laser and radar. That having snow in the winter doesn't mean global warming isn't real. That when you make a Fantastic Four movie, you should try to make it good. That just because you have your turning signal on, it doesn't mean just go ahead and cut somebody off. Finland fought hard in World War II, and on both sides, because Stalin wanted Finland. That pound cake is not just a name, but a recipe, traditionally a pound each of flour, sugar, butter, eggs, and a dash of vanilla and salt. I was having a conversation with a friend about what desserts could be made with just what's in the normal pantry, and I mentioned pound cake, and he asked for the ingredients in the recipe. I'd assumed everyone knew pound cake was a recipe, so I found this request somewhat odd. He had never heard of it being a recipe, started asking other people over the next few days, and no one I asked knew about it. Polyglottism. In my country, most people speak at least 3 languages – English, Malay, Mandarin, or other Malay dialects – on a daily basis. My family and I can speak 4 languages – English, Malay, Mandarin, and Hokkien – fluently. I'm also able to speak basic Cantonese, Korean, and Tagalog. So I'm confused when people treat my multilingualism as some sort of special intellectual power. I was born and raised in a multilingual society. There's nothing special about my linguistic ability. Frankenstein is the name of the doctor who made the monster, not the monster itself. Africa is not a country, it's a continent. But South Africa is a country. That data is the plural form of datum.
Trebuchets are the superior siege machine. You'd be surprised at how many didn't actually know this.
Why the sky is blue. This debate keeps popping up everywhere I seem to go, and without fail everyone agrees it's because it reflects the ocean. In fact, blue light is scattered in all directions by tiny molecules of air in the Earth's atmosphere. Blue is scattered more than the other colors because it travels as shorter, smaller waves. That's why we see a blue sky most of the time. How about one that isn't common knowledge but probably should be? If you're like me and put something on your computer to watch as you go to bed, knowing the shutdown timer command is great. Open the command prompt, or in Windows 10, simply type into the search bar shutdown-s-t 3600. The 3600 is how many seconds after you enter the command the computer will shut down. -3600 equals 1 hour. You can do whatever time you want. It saves electricity and keeps your bright monitor from waking you up later. That bees are female. The ones you see anyway. There are drone bees who impregnate the queen, but the worker bees are all female. The same with ants or any hive insect. The husband and I discussed this once and it completely blew his mind. I didn't realize he legit didn't know, so I let out a chuckle. And he thought I was making fun of his ignorance and got super angry. Now it's a joke between us, but I was seriously confused. And this isn't the same for all hive animals. Termites are not the same. They're a mix of male and female, but the queen secretes a hormone that suppresses reproduction amongst the workers. Thank you for subscribing to Bug Facts. 2 things. So yeah, the narrator also thought that all bees that weren't the queen were the male ones. And as creepy and alien as most insects are to us, termites just seem that bit weirder now. Because apparently they're one dead queen away from going into a mating frenzy. Or maybe that's not how it works. The more you know. That Britain isn't a separate country from England. When I moved to the US, I lost count of the number of people who couldn't understand that I was both English and British. What really messed with their heads was when I pointed out I was also European. Please explain this to the people who make Outlander. I'm so tired of the whole "the Scots are fighting the Brits" crap. People, please, the Scots are British too. New England isn't a state, it's the regroupment of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. Apparently I didn't know that 2 weeks ago. Evolution. I had no idea it would be considered controversial. Happened to mention it to a coworker like he asked about the book I was reading and it was on some biology crap, and among other things I said blah blah about how these evolved to do this, and the next thing I know he's flipping right the frick out on me like, "You can't seriously believe that nonsense." And then he bullied me the whole rest of the time I worked there and even recruited a couple of easily manipulated, dim-witted idiots who worked there to bully me too. You'd think he'd calm down after the first couple of hours, you know? At least by the next day, but nope. He stayed furious forever, over me mentioning stuff that's taught from like grade 4 or something onwards. And I didn't even suspect that a moment of chit-chat about ants or something, I forget what the book was about, could erupt into any sort of problem. It was really startling, like I opened a whole can of peanut brittle and snakes popped out. I just don't get it. Either you accept the scientific method allows us to figure things out and experts can inform the rest of us about their field's accumulated knowledge, or you don't. And if you don't accept it, then how can you trust airplanes or heart surgeons or prescriptions or gas appliances or anything else done using science? If you do, then how do you justify trusting, say, the heart surgeon, but not the paleontologist or geologist? I'd met religious folks before, of course, but as far as I knew, they justified discrepancies between scripture and facts, like God causing evolution and that passage being a metaphor, rather than deciding the discrepancies mean fact is not fact. The guy's intense horror at the very idea that someone might trust science was a whole other thing from how normal religious people think. I hope. Maybe more people than I know feel the way he does, but they're just smoother and keep it quiet. And there's something bad the incident's done to me now. Now I'm less likely to trust religious people. Like, I try to avoid telling them anything about me because I'm afraid of another freakout, and I don't know what all the things are that they might find triggering. That Northern Ireland is a country, that it's within the UK and people use sterling there. That Titanic absolutely happened and it isn't just a movie. When you drive up to a big box store like Walmart, Kroger, whatever, one side says home or something similar, and one says fresh or something similar. Home is the non-food stuff, normally starting with a pharmacy section. Fresh is the food size. My partner had no idea and had just been guessing at which side to go in for the past decade. He just assumed people knew which side because they'd been there before. When I visited the US and Florida when I was 13, I was asked by an American woman, "What's it like living in an igloo?" I'm from Canada. I couldn't respond because I was baffled. We live in ice castles, lady. Do your research. You get fat when you eat more calories than you burn over a long period of time. Everyone seems to think it's because of carbs or fats or your thyroid, or because Mercury is in retrograde or some other mystical, mysterious BS. Computers. I grew up around computers and watched my mum use ours at home often, and I picked up on how to use it, troubleshoot, etc. Apparently, having common knowledge of computers is a rare trait that a lot of people just don't have. It's also apparently not common knowledge anymore for people to be able to count change, read an analog clock, or know the difference between north, south, east, and west. Also, this one's probably not common knowledge, but it's something that I learned recently that blew my mind a bit. You ever wonder the best way to tell which side the gas tank is on without getting out of your vehicle? If you look at the gas tank meter, you'll see the picture of a gas tank, and there's usually a little triangle right next to it. That triangle points to whatever side the gas tank is on. That Christians are Jews who believe Christ was the Son of God, and Muslims are Jews who believe in Muhammad as a prophet. They all still worship the same God, the God of Abraham. Most people think it's 3 different gods. It's almost as if they never actually read their religious texts. People having their lives figured out. Took me a lot longer to realize that most, if not all adults are not sure what the frick they're doing. What's the most disturbing thing you've seen when performing a background check on someone? The place at which I'm a board member fired someone this week for social media, posting pictures of vulnerable individuals and making fun of people with Down syndrome on a personal Facebook. A family member notified staff about the posting. The staff member thought it was outrageous to be fired from the Camp for Special Needs Kids for the posts.
I can't believe I frickin' work with handicapped people all day.
You're fired.
Oh, but boss, I wasn't insulting the differently abled.
Oh?
I was talking about you.
I wouldn't necessarily call it disturbing, but it was the deciding factor in not hiring somebody. We interviewed a guy for an entry-level position. His interview went well, and the other 2 people on the hiring committee were enthusiastic about him, but something about him bothered me. I don't normally check applicants out on Facebook, but I decided to in this case. His most recent post was something to the tune of, "Just got fired again, this is so much bullcrap." Someone asked him in the comments what happened, and his response was, "It was my 3rd no-call, no-show. I was too hungover to bother. Those buttholes had it coming for scheduling me right after a holiday." Entitled, irresponsible, and daft enough to broadcast it in a public post? Sign me up.
I've had applicants say this kind of crap to my face in an interview.
So what you're saying is that your last 4 employers were all out to get you? Seems plausible with no other explanation. A guy who said he had an assault charge 15 years ago. He wasn't lying, but that was the start of 27 pages of criminal history that included 2 years of incarceration, during which time his app said he was self-employed as a carpenter. The history was predominantly assaults, thefts, and possession of illegal substances. I had never seen 27 pages of criminal history on one person. I will add this though, he actually did turn his life around. He ended up working at the gym I went to and then got an additional job at a seafood distributor. I would never have guessed that he was the guy that would turn it all around, but he did.
We had a guy interview a couple of months ago who claimed he had a couple of DUIs in the past.
Job doesn't require driving, so not a deal breaker, and they schedule him for a substance screening and physical. Then his background check came back. He didn't have a couple of DUIs, he had 13, along with numerous convictions for theft, assault, domestic violence, substances, etc., totaling 65 pages. He was promptly called and had the job offer rescinded. Boy, feels like you either get none or you get all of the quirks at once in some of these cases. Or the ones who only have a couple of minor offenses aren't problematic enough to be reported here, I suppose. He was hired before I started, much before, but I'd been doing an audit for our files and I noticed his background check had a conviction for his behavior with children, or something like that in the 80s. This was a man my boss regularly had play Santa at Christmas parties, where the children would sit on his lap. This was the moment I realized the president of the company was a fricking moron. But that guy got fired for insubordination like a year or so ago, so there's that. Frick, background checks for anyone that works with children. Not an employer, but I handle work comp claims. Just had a guy complaining complete incapacity while going on 4 trips to Asia and back, as well as hyping his business all on his Facebook page. Just sent a subpoena for his business records, so that should be fun. I used to work in a department that did background checks on potential childcare employees. One guy had been charged with assault of a minor by instrumentation when he worked at a church daycare and had subsequently been let go and charged. He was out on bail and applying to work in a different church daycare. The problem was that he'd only been charged and there was no conviction yet, so he didn't show up on any of the registries. I don't remember how I found out about the charge, but it was an accident. I think it was maybe a newspaper article or something. If an employer checked my background in Facebook, they would just see what a boring life I have. And you're hired.
With minimum pay.
Mine would just see a bunch of random posts that my mum tags me in, like 4+ a day, and nothing else. Not so much Facebook, but I will Google people. I Googled an applicant we interviewed and seemed to like. Unfortunately, their top results were losing their nursing credentials for writing fake prescriptions for controlled substances. A few years back. And a recent police arrest for driving under the influence and having prescription substances without a prescription. It actually made me sad as they seemed likable, but off. Unfortunately, not in a place to risk trusting someone with such a poor history of judgment and addiction issues.
Question. I deleted all of my social media accounts. Is it a red flag to not be involved in social media?
No, employees might think you're just hard to find, or if your name is common enough that they can't find the right John Smith. I get assigned interns to work with me based on a term or year from the university nearby. I make it a habit to do a quick Facebook search so I'll recognize their faces from the dozen of other interns when they come in. Lots of party pics, smoking green herb, which is legal here, so in the same realm as those party pics, and women in almost no clothing. Also lots of mirror ab shots, though my field is largely female-dominated. All I look for is the profile picture, I don't do any digging. All the interns I've actually seen get hired have had very normal profile pictures. You know, smiling, with friends, on a hike, etc. Not because of their pics, but because they're the kind of people who understand professional versus private life, and what is appropriate for public viewing. I was doing background checks for the British Airport Authority during a massive hiring drive in 2007, after there was an attempt to drive a car full of gas canisters into the terminal of Glasgow Airport by 2 Islamic extremists. Due to the need to hire several thousand staff in a few months, the normal requirements relating to job stability, etc. were relaxed, so people who hadn't worked in 10 to 20 years were getting interviewed, which led to a few interesting ones. The only one which I can remember in detail was a guy from Belfast. He hadn't worked since 1990, but they were willing to give him a chance. When we checked his history, he'd spent 5 years in HMP, the Maze, due to being convicted of terror offences, before being released as part of the Good Friday Agreement. It turned out that the guy spent his life applying to jobs with long recruitment processes that he couldn't get due to his particular conviction, as that meant he was seen as an active job seeker and wouldn't lose his benefits. Remember Trainspotting when Renton tells the interviewers that he's a smack addict? Similar to that. Strangely enough, he wasn't invited for an interview. In short, a convicted NRA terror fighter applied for a job designed to catch people like him. I work for a background screening company. We do not do social media checks, though we are incredibly thorough, because it can lead to a world of problems. For instance, if you find out that an applicant is gay and deny him the job because he has a criminal record or something, not because he's a homosexual, he can claim discrimination and sue. Consumers have to be provided a copy of their background check after the research is done, so they will see that a social media search was conducted. I hope this makes sense. We do not look for sexual orientation, gender, race, etc. This is a hypothetical situation that explains why not to look at social media for a job. There you go, folks. If you're going to put something suspicious on your social media, make sure you also have posts that align you as some sort of discriminated group. This is why my profile is private and my pic is obscure or of me in a costume, so you're not 100% sure it's me.
You frickin' furry.
Pictures of them smoking green herb or being belligerently drunk. Not that I personally care, but you're just asking for trouble, especially if you're going into a public sector job. Think of it as a reference. Only you're the one giving the feedback on yourself. I actually had one kid who's had a profile picture which was him in the buck, cupping his Johnson with the caption, "Pricks out for Harambe." Did I mention he'd applied for our marketing and social media internship? For your information, this was in New York, so unfortunately herb is still illegal. Not sure if anyone understands what public sector means, but this kid was going to be a state employee. You can see the issue. Uncle Sam gives us a checklist of red flags to look out for. Flat Earth, Jack could have fit on the door, moon landing wasn't real, Harambe was murdered, pineapple goes on pizza, wrestling isn't real, Ken Bone was a hero, Ryan Lochte actually got robbed, Coney 2012, the dress was white and gold. If we see any of these, it's an automatic disqualification. This was actually on MySpace back in the day. I was hiring for a position that involved review of patient medical records in a hospital setting, and as you can imagine, involved a great deal of confidentiality and discretion by the person hired for the position. One of the applicants worked at a bank, but had some prior experience in the medical field, so I was considering her for the position. I checked out her MySpace page and found tons of pictures of her in the bank vault, in her undies, posing suggestively with large amounts of money. The contents of the pictures themselves didn't bother me so much as her complete lack of discretion and stupidity in posting these pictures publicly where any of her employers might have found them. I was disgusted thinking about what she might have done with others' private health information if we had hired her. We had a 40-something lady apply, and whilst doing the usual checks, we went to her Facebook to find her profile picture is of her husband, and her daughter at a swingers party, all completely au naturel, and her with a different man behind her. We were dumbstruck. Second-degree murder. We didn't hire. I'm not an employer, but a few years after I resigned from a job that I'd worked at for years, I found I needed to contact my old GM. I called where I used to work and discovered he had quit, so I decided to look him up online. That's when I discovered that the guy I was working for prior to him becoming my GM had 2 crystal convictions under his belt. I can't judge though, he was one of the most awesome people I've ever worked for. I just thought it was funny. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was trying to hire a nanny. This girl sends me her application. Everything looks really good. So I put her phone number into Facebook to see what it's like and add her to mine. Her background photo is a girl, on all fours with a bra and panties on and a guy about to do a line off her butt. I was going to send her an email saying, due to your Facebook page, I won't be interviewing you. My husband told me not to help out other parents she's trying to get a job from.
I'm a nanny, and I make sure my Facebook is squeaky clean. Granted, I'm a squeaky clean kind of person, but I always think about what I'm posting pictures of, or what or how that will reflect on me. It doesn't help that my last 2 bosses and their parents all asked to add me on Facebook, and my current boss sent me a friend request. But I guess it says something about me when the last 2 families love me enough to want to keep up with me and still include me in their lives. All they see is cute smiling pictures of me and cats. Lots of pictures of cats. I teach small children. I live in the lumen fear that my students will learn I have vices like drinking and swearing. Everything is friends locked except for some generic, watch me do completely normal things, photos and quotes. The rule I tell younger people is it something you're comfortable with your boss, grandparents, or a small child seeing? I had a reference once tell me that they had let the guy go for stalking his ex-wife from the company phones. That was his reference. One guy was a huge Phillies fan. End of story. I check Facebook for all my hires. I love the ones who have their page public, so I get to see all of their crazy. Seriously, why try to get a job when you've worked at 10+ jobs in the past year and laugh when you get fired for not doing your job? Or when you post videos of doing stupid crap at work? Or talking about your substance use and partying every night? Or baby daddy drama?
Or like when you keep getting locked up in a county jail over and over, or when you leave a ton of negative reviews of other small businesses acting like servers are your servants when you're applying for a server position, or baby mama drama, or… These are just the ones I remember off the top of my head, and all of these are actual things I've seen. FYI, be smart people, hide that crap. I once started to do business with someone and decided to check their Facebook. Multiple walls of text about B and C words they had to work with pictures of the individual looking tough to the camera. I figured that when you have beef with everyone you work with, you're a problem. I cut off business after they failed to even show up for our first meeting. It's not disturbing, but a good story. Before my company had HR, I did the interviews with a couple of other people. I interviewed this girl who seemed like a good fit. After the interviews, I looked her up on Facebook. She had just posted, "I just had a job interview. I think it went well. The pay is crap though." The pay wasn't crap considering she had no experience, so my first thought was the obvious. I'm not going to hire her. Later that evening I was in Target and I happened to see her working there. She didn't see me. She had this big smile on her face and was the aura of someone who was very positive. The next day, I did hire her. 5 years later, she worked her way up pretty high. She has an awesome career in digital marketing now. She has no idea. The pay being fair doesn't preclude it also being crap. Likely she was talking crap to her friends to sound cool rather than being legitimately ungrateful. Not disturbing, the opposite. We interviewed a kid who was a total bag of nerves but seemed good, otherwise. Just bad at interviews. When we looked him up, his Facebook said something like, "Crashed and burned in an interview today, really down, I would have loved to get that job." We had a big discussion about whether it was genuine, but I figured if he was playing us, it was worthy of a reward anyway. He worked out great. Illegal discharge of a piece from a moving vehicle which caused great bodily harm. Man, why bother trying when we said no felons? My boss interviewed him to maybe find out if it was an accident. Nope. He shot his brother in a heated argument after a drive-by they did together. Said brother is now a quad. It's for a bail bondsman agency too. Moron. I am not a manager, but most of my team participates in interviewing potential teammates. I was preparing for an interview and I routinely Google their names to see what comes up. In the past, I've been pleasantly surprised to find industry-related accolades that the applicant was too humble to list on their resume. But this time, I came up with a long string of blog posts. I got sucked into the rabbit hole at that point, and the next 2 hours were spent reading all of these blog entries about this wife who was involved in widespread internet trolling and bullying. There were websites dedicated to how horrible this woman was, people invested in domain names related to the message, and paid for hosting just to call her out. So I was left with quite the dilemma. As a result of her bullying, her victims and opponents had dedicated quite a bit of time to doxing her, and as a result her husband and his employer. I figured that I would hold on to this information and only inform my boss if we all felt he was a solid candidate that we would hire. The guy came in for the interview, and while I was asking him questions the whole time, I was thinking about his insane wife, but not saying a word. He somehow worked into the conversation that he'd recently divorced, which at the moment further complicated the issue in my mind. When we met as a team after the interviews to discuss how he'd performed, my boss said he wasn't impressed with his responses to the technical questions and didn't seem like a good fit for the team, which was a huge relief to me. I'm not certain what the right call would have been if he had been a good fit. It would be wrong to judge him based upon his ex-wife's actions, but if there's an army of people on the internet targeting her husband's employer in efforts to get him fired, that can be a headache to deal with. Had an intern that was working with our social media marketing group. She put in a really hateful ticket about how she needed Facebook open on the web gateway filter for her job. So one of the guys on our team looked her up on social media just kind of interested. Here was a big long post about how incompetent IT was at my company and how she had to get on her personal cell phone to browse. We all thought her boss should see her post. She was gone the next day. Seriously, you talk crap about the boss's backs to friends and family, not in a place the bosses will find out. Seemed like an average kid, but the entire Twitter feed was furry adult content. Not an employer and not about me, but my mother does check some of her customers out on Facebook for her Amazon and eBay deals. She's a third-party seller on both sites. She once got an order and looked on the person's Facebook. The person was bragging repeatedly there about how she had scammed multiple Amazon sellers out of inventory and got her money back. She cancelled the order for the textbook via Amazon. The customer asked her why she cancelled it. Mom reported that customer and pointed it out to the customer. She shouldn't have her Facebook set on public mode if she wanted to scam sellers. I heard that customer was banned from Amazon soon after that. Oh boy, I once interviewed a guy for an entry-level manufacturing position. He was in his mid-30s, I guess, and he seemed alright, if not a little socially awkward, and mentioned he wanted the job because he had a baby on the way, and wanted something solid as he was picking up odd jobs with relatives' companies. This job required basically no skill, so we hired nearly everyone we interviewed. After he left, I went back to my desk and looked him up on Facebook. He was obsessed with Rihanna. Photoshopped himself into pictures with her, had her as his cover photo, and had a lot of softcore adult content with her head photoshopped onto the models. Nearly every one of his status updates were about her. It was freaking weird as heck. The kicker, though, was that his profile picture was him with a photoshopped picture of a pregnant Rihanna with his hand on her belly. He did not get a call back. You know what? I'm starting to think that he might not have actually had a baby on the way. Used to be a staffing consultant and had to background check everyone. Had somebody with first-degree murder pop up. That was pretty weird considering we do the backgrounds while they're in the office. Had another guy have a B&D pop up, and he wanted to explain. He and some friends broke into a co-op and put all the feed against the door so the owner couldn't get in. It was meant to be a prank, and now it's on his record. My supervisor wouldn't let us hire him, which I thought was lame. Don't do dumb things as adults, kids. I interviewed a guy in his late 50s. He hadn't worked for years as he had been a single parent to 4 kids. He passed the interview, support position working with elderly people. We then went on to discuss a DBS check, which is where you check any criminal record. He said it would be fine, he didn't have a record. He then asked me how long records stay on the system for. I said, "What am I looking for? Forever." "Oh," he said. "Well, I do have something to admit to. My wife said I shouldn't say anything about it, but I guess I'll have to. When my first wife left, I couldn't work because of the kids, so I got involved in adult films. I'm not sure how, but it led to films involving the kids, and I was sent to prison." The room went silent. I honestly did not know what to say. I was just aware that I was in a room, alone, in an empty office with this disgusting, vile man. He must have known and said, "I'll take it I haven't got the job." I said, "Sorry, no." And he left. I wish I'd said more, but I was so shocked and a bit scared. Red pill and racist pages they've liked or commented on. Some guy had an incredible resume and interviewed really well. Then we saw his comment on Mexicans and one particular recent school shooting. Yeah, we passed. Not an employer, but when I was working at my last job, my supervisor would always come up in my suggested friends. I'm quiet and reserved, so she was probably curious. I had a goofy Mimi profile picture and a cover photo of Louis Theroux at the time. Don't think it would have been too disturbing. I recently took a promotion and I'm working on my replacement in my prior role. The job requires you to be extremely reliable and able to work with generally no supervision. We're taking our time and doing several levels of interviews as well as informal meetings such as dinners or lunches. Those tend to catch people off guard and I get free food. 2 weeks ago, I was poking around a lady's Facebook page, and most of it was pretty normal, until I found her comment on an article about a cop shooting a dog. She referenced the owners of the dog as monkeys. These people were African American and sided with the cop on shooting the chained-up dog. Her profile was extremely professional except for the article comments. The monkey comment was just the tip. This lady was a full-bore racist. Ex-prisoners. What's the most disturbing thing you've ever heard or witnessed from a fellow prisoner? As the narrator, I feel inclined to warn people that there are some pretty extreme descriptions of violence in these posts. I really mean it. I've done a few grim videos in the past, but there was at least one story here that I had to take a long walk after. You've been warned. One of the women I was in with was in for life. The reason that she was in was because someone had sold her fake smack, so she had decided to murder this person. She goes to their house, cuts the gas line, and burns the house down. Turns out she had the wrong house and killed an entire family in their sleep. She tried to punk me out a few times, but I don't take people seriously if we can't communicate, like intelligent human beings. She was obviously trying to avoid herself in all areas. It was really sad. Had a pool table while locked up. Nobody used the cues or balls to do stuff, because if you got our pool table taken away, you'd better hope they took you away from us too. If fights drew blood, everyone would come out of the woodwork with their little hand towels to clean up all the blood before the COs would come out. I have a very funny image in my head of several thuggish dudes cleaning up blood from a fight. "Oh, you missed a spot, Reggie." "Sorry about that, Todd. I'll get right on that." 6 months in Rikers Island, New York. Watched a girl try to drown herself in her cell toilet for 2 hours, just running her head in, trying to stay under, while COs stood and laughed. When they left, she peed on the floor to flood the cell to get their attention again. Not a prisoner, but my professor works with prisoners. She told us she had this client that had recently got out of jail, telling her that the most enjoyable thing in prison was the group's therapy session. He said, "I really love the group therapy because it gave me ideas of other people's emotions when confessing their crimes. It taught me the emotions I'm supposed to feel when confessing in court again to reduce my sentence next time." She was really surprised that this serial killer is that honest, and she was really spooked at the same time. Oh god, there's someone taking acting courses in prison for how to get a shorter sentence so that they can get back out and commit more crimes quicker. I went to jail for about 3 weeks because of driving with a suspended license. We all slept in these huge rooms with bathroom and living area connected. About a week in, I hear some guy get up and use the small microwave that we're given in the living area to make stuff hot like ramen. It's not normal for the microwave to be used after lights out, but I figured that maybe he had a roll or something he wanted to heat up and munch on before sleeping. The guard posted on the far wall never said anything to him or even got up from his seat, though I could tell from my bunk he was watching the inmate. So the guy comes back to the bed area and walks right past me with his bowl in his hands. I close my eyes and try to go to sleep, but the silence is shattered by a blood-curdling scream from a couple of rows down. The guy had filled a bowl with baby oil and heated it till boiling, and then poured it on some guy's face in his sleep. Found out later that I had some kind of fight a few days earlier, and the baby oil guy was out for revenge. Burn guy had third-degree burns on his face, neck, shoulders, and chest. Baby oil guy was taken away, and we never heard from him again. Also, we lost our microwave, so to heat things up we had to use hot water from the sink and just let stuff sit in it forever to heat it up. Sucked to be sure, but not as bad as being covered in boiling fricking oil. This is why you can't have nice things in prison. My dad was telling me about how in the POW camp in Colditz in World War II, officers had to eventually ban fricking everything because stuff was being used to either smuggle in contraband or be used as tools for escape and whatnot. Pretty much the only luxury the prisoners had was fruit jam, until a man was found in the yard one day, blinded by the moonshine that was made from it. So this jam was banned too. Well, they may have taken 99% of our luxuries, but at least we still have the delicious jam? Actually. Oh god damn it, Barry. I was in a holding cell for unpaid tickets once. It was way overcrowded. They brought in a new guy who complained right as he entered. Hell no. There are too many people in here, man. He sat quietly for a few minutes while another inmate talked crap to the annoyance of most everyone else. Finally, the new guy, who was bigger than anyone else in the cell and clearly the most veteran inmate, walked up to the talker guy. "Sorry, man, I ain't sitting in here no more. It's too crowded. You need to shut the frick up." He then punched talker guy in the face and then went to the door and started pounding it. "Guard, I just punched this dude. Come get me." The guards were already on their way, and as they pulled him out, he left with these words of wisdom and commands to the guards. "Y'all take me to solitary. I take the assault route because it's too fricking crowded and hot in here. It's inhumane to keep so many people in here. Take me to solitary." I envied his clever escape and reminded myself that I was only there for a traffic ticket, and as much as solitary sounded like heaven, it might not be worth emulating his departure strategy. Never been to prison, but when I worked in the ER, I saw a lot of prisoners come in with all sorts of injuries, but two really stand out. The first one was a guy who was shanked in the abdomen and his intestines were literally hanging out. I remember he was stone-faced and wasn't saying anything, just looked straight ahead. I'm sure he'd been given pain meds, but still. We slid him on the stretcher, and I remember I went to move him up the bed a little bit, and as soon as I started to slide him up, he grabbed my arm and said, "Hold up a minute, homie, that hurts a little bit," in the most nonchalant voice I've ever heard. The second was a guy who tried to kill himself by stripping into the buck and just laying on the cold floor for hours. The floor was so cold, it ended up dropping his core temperature to around 92 degrees Fahrenheit. A quiet kid we called Harry Potter because of his glasses. He was pretty young and definitely lacking in street smarts, and we could never figure out why he was there, until we caught the news from a guard that he threw a pot of boiling water on his wheelchair-bound grandma because she was being too loud while he watched his favorite TV show. Out of all the sick crap people were locked up for, that one is pretty hard to swallow. If you ever got locked up, remember to always be respectful of those around you because you never know what kinds of messed up people are in there with you. Stories I've heard firsthand, one guy was locked up with a heap of smack still shoved up his butt. He was popular. Another guy got noticeably drunk on someone else's booze, prompting a lockdown and search. He died from a head injury a few days later. Another group of guys teased the necrophiliac until he had a breakdown and chased them through prison trying to kill them. They hid behind a guard, peeing themselves, laughing while he was subdued. Fun times. I was in juvenile prison. I'd just gotten into the intake unit. The guy that was escorted into the building behind me had committed the unspeakable act. Well, we walked into the unit and some kid walks up to him and starts beating his face. He takes out a toothbrush and starts shoving it up his butt. The COs didn't let that go on too long, but it caused some serious damage. Well, some guys from the unit told me he crapped himself and couldn't control it. Turns out the guy that beat up the crapping boy was the older brother of the boy that had the unspeakable act committed against him by Crap Boy. The most disgusting thing I saw and smelled was when I was on lockup. This one inmate took a coffee bag, filled it with 3-week-old bodily fluids. He then gets out for his 1-hour rec and proceeds to place the open part underneath this other guy's cell door and stomp on the bag. It sprayed the most disgusting, rancid concoction of bodily fluids all over this inmate. After his epic display of biological warfare, he pulled down his pants and shook his wang at the inmates he had just crapped all over. As the man writing this script, I can tell you that you do not want to know the specific fluids that the author wrote that went into the bag. But it was all of them. Whatever you're thinking, it was all in there in a nasty cocktail. Gross. I pleasured myself in a holding cell, not knowing there were cameras watching me. 2 officers walked in telling me to put my wang away because there was a lady watching me on the cameras. Honestly, I was so mortified that I forgot that I was about to get reamed in court. How in the heck did you get in the mood to crank it before court in a holding cell? What the frick else am I supposed to do? 20 hours on a wooden bench with no shoes on, and the floor is so nasty you don't even want to touch it. Ah, the old forlorn nut. Caught guilty of underage drinking. A guy that was there when I got there gets up after an hour or so of me coming in. He goes and sits down on the toilet that's in the same small room as the 10 of us guys that were there, right in front of the window to the officer's desk area/office, and has explosive diarrhea. It's horrible, breathing through our shirts for 2 hours. New guy comes in and is told from an experienced player that he should try and make himself throw up so he won't be in as long. They release you when you're sober. So what's he do? Puts his drunk head into the toilet bowl, rests his face on the seat, and passes out. It was a gross, gross day. Obligatory, not me, but someone I know. They went to federal prison in Ontario for getting caught with a lot of substances. Anyway, he told me that they put smack addicts in with the general population, but they're given a small cup of methadone each morning at a certain time, and they'd sit in the chair and wait for their bodies to absorb it. What some guys would do, though, was shake in their chairs to try and stave off the absorption, and then when they'd get back in their cells later, they'd induce vomiting into a sock inside of a can and use that as a filter. Then it was for sale. Yeah, doing regurgitated smack is a thing in Canadian prison. Severe violence and death of an infant warning. I did a few years in a state prison and saw and heard a lot of brutal, crazy stuff. Murders, the unspeakable act, fatal amounts of substance use, riots. But the one thing that's never left me was a story a guy told me about his murder case. He was babysitting his girlfriend's new baby, a few months old, and the baby wouldn't stop crying, so he put it in a pillowcase and slammed it against a wall for 20 minutes. He said he knew the baby was messed up after the first hit, but he just kept going. Said it was like a bloody pulp sack. Stuff really messed me up. Also, one of the other bad ones I saw was a guy get stabbed through the eye with a 10-inch knife. Dude dropped, killing him instantly, and he never saw it coming. A couple of people put him in a laundry cart, and the COs didn't find him for about 10 hours. The guy who killed him was 19 and serving an 11-month sentence. He said he just wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. They convicted him, federal, for capital murder, and he got like 99 years. Unfortunately, there's a lot of young kids who go in with small sentences and never get out. Worked at a maximum security mental health facility. A guy talked about how he didn't understand why he was having nightmares about boiling lobsters alive. This was 5 minutes after he talked about how he killed his ex-girlfriend, cut her up, and boiled her head because she was accusing him of cheating. Oh, and how if he could just talk to her parents, they would understand because she wasn't a good person. I was in administrative isolation, and there was a guy across the way who kept smearing his crap on the plexiglass so the COs couldn't see inside. The guards were sick of his crap, quite literally, so one night when he did it, the CO on watch dared the guy to lick his own poop off the glass. He did. Christmas time in jail. It may have been Christmas Eve, not sure. Many years ago. Nighttime. Around 8 p.m, I guess. They had huts, which could sleep about 20 guys each. I was in the short-timers hut. For some reason they called the long-timers long sweeps. No idea why. Anyway, a bunch of long sweepers started gathering around our hut, just outside the chain-link fence. Massive guys, tats on arms, and even fingers, and all carrying a little something in their fist. Group gets up to about 12 guys, all standing around silently, saying nothing, and we were getting pretty nervous. Then, just as it gets dark, a couple of little possums crawl down out of one of the trees. Little Aussie sugar gliders. Yeah, they really can fly or glide between the trees. Here's a bunch of the biggest, baddest dudes I've ever seen, standing around waiting to hand-feed little possums bread and sugar. They were very gentle with them. My brother told me a story about pre-prison when he was in jail. He bunked with a substance addict who was seemingly just dope sick as frick. He said he was moaning and groaning all night. He tried to tell the COs he needed help, but they ignored him, left him be. Then he puked all over himself, and the COs still wouldn't help him. They just left him there all pukey. Then after a while he started seizing. He had 2 seizures. COs did nothing. They thought he was faking. My brother said about an hour later he stopped making noises. He was silent, so he checked on him. He was grey and unresponsive, totally slipped away. Fricking buttholes let a technically innocent man die of benzo withdrawal overnight. I've seen COs ignore a man who was having a seizure on 3 different occasions. Also, same man every time. It was the scariest thing to witness someone dropping and having a seizure, and the guards were just laughing it off like, "Don't worry, this happens every time he's here." It was fricked up. They did get him help, but they didn't seem to care too much either. Oh, I have one. My friend was a former medical assistant at a local prison. She told me a pretty gross story that happened a while back. One of the inmates, a male, was being manipulated by one of the COs. The CO made the inmate give him oral, and when he tried to tell someone about it, no one believed him. So after the end of oral, the inmate saved the semen in his mouth, spit it in a napkin, and had his family send out the semen to get tested, and that's how the CO was caught. It was on the news and everything, I'm pretty sure. Honestly, as awful as that story is, I'm just glad to be posting one that has an element of justice in it, since most of these are stories of just the awful stuff that goes on inside these places. Mum was a CO at Hancock State Penitentiary in Georgia. Here are my favorite 3. The nicest guy in the place asks my mum if she wants to know what he's in for. He told her that he caught his wife cheating, so he just went and sat in his recliner to calm down. She came out and wouldn't stop apologizing after he told her to leave him alone, so he literally cut her face off. During a riot, inmates are doubled bunk in solitary confinement for a weekend. A young kid, presumably a snitch, was locked in with a significantly larger and older gangbanger notorious for the unspeakable act. The kid spent some time in hospital. You don't need details. Mum came upon a man who was stabbed in the skull right before his release. 6-inch shank sticking out of the top of his head. He kept calling out for his daughter. He didn't make it. Job screwed my mum up to the point where she started smuggling substances into the prison, and we no longer have a relationship. Don't go to prison, folks. I'm a Canadian, however I got caught up in the US federal prison system, USP Atlanta. This place, my friends, is as nasty as it gets. A new fish came in, and after doing his obligatory time in the SHU, he got moved into my unit. When he arrived, he was asked if he had any contraband with him by some of the other brothers. He made a vital mistake by telling them no, but later opening up to his cellie that he had some green herb. In prison, it doesn't take long for the block to know what's going on, and so that next morning when this guy went to the shower, he was jumped by a half-dozen or so guys. They proceeded to fill up shampoo bottles with warm water and soap, then stuck them halfway up his butt in order to get the green herb out. Although this definitely would have cleaned him out, it didn't force the green herb out. One of the brothers then put on a rubber glove and went straight into the guy's butthole in order to get it out. Once they got what they were after, they proceeded to knock the guy out and hang him up to send the message. It was pretty messed up, and there was nothing anybody could do. He learned the hard way. I was in a cell for a week in a Denver city jail. My cellmate was in for the week waiting on a pickup to take him over to the ICE holding. He was older, and since he was being held and transferred over an immigration issue, he was deemed low risk. It turns out he was a famous Ethiopian torturer who had killed and maimed hundreds of prisoners. He was part of the Red Terror and was not a good guy. Being in 23-hour lockdown with this guy in a cell the size of a walk-in closet was interesting to say the least. So I've never been incarcerated, however I used to work for our local jails as a medical officer. Still to this day, I'm traumatized by abscesses the size of golf balls, leaking smelly green pus, and a girl we like to refer to as Pharmacy Snatch. Pharmacy Snitch was found taking pills in the book holding cells and somehow smuggled these pills into Gen Pop. She entered my clinic with her hands in her uniform, and I kept hearing a rustling sound of some sort. I promptly called the acting captain in to investigate, and had to witness the good old squat and cough. As Pharmacy Snatch did as she was told, a rubber glove containing 20 pills, a Bic pipe, foils, and a lighter fell out. She had some more pills in her uniform shirt and shoe as well, which is where I heard the noise. She tried to throw it behind my desk. I didn't actually go to prison, but I spent a year in Los Angeles County Jail, which is the most infamous for being the suckiest system in the US. It does suck. It sucks terribly. 1. It was my first week and I was sitting on my bunk when I suddenly hear what sounds like a rabbit dying a gruesome death. Turns out a guy got caught stealing and was getting stomped out. The thief was getting his head stomped on by 3 other guys, over which I found out later was a stolen ramen packet. What went through my mind was, these people are going to put this poor guy into a wheelchair over $1. Not a pretty sight for a first-timer, but what I remember most was the screaming. I reiterate that it sounded just like a rabbit getting mauled. Poor guy left on a stretcher. 2. I heard this from an OG who's been in and out of the system. Apparently upstate, in prison, there's a guy from Grape Street Crip who went by the name Purple Passion. Supposedly, Purple Passion was 6'3", 250 plus pounds, and who once he found someone he liked would KO the unfortunate victim and reap the spoils. If he liked it, he'll leave an unwrapped and bitten Snickers bar. If not, then a wrapped Snickers bar. Now, what went through my mind was, how could someone be so cruel yet so considerate as to plant a Snickers afterwards? Also heard of others, if not the same person, going by a different name, Snickers Bandit, and El Hoto Magnifico Caliente. 3. You can hear a popping sound, closest I can describe, when someone is stabbed. 4. The Asians, or others, used to have their own exclusive dorm, but that was revoked in the early 2000s when an inmate was killed. I can't remember whether it was over a gambling dispute or because he'd done stuff to kids. Supposedly, there was an attempt to conceal the killing by snapping the bones of the deceased and dismembering the limbs with crude instruments. They then stuffed what parts they couldn't flush down the toilet into the laundry cart. 5. Inmates are housed in either dorms, 60-foot by 90-foot rooms that hold 64 to 96 people, or in cells. I was housed in the former. So we're kept in these concrete boxes, and when a riot pops off due to interracial disputes, there's no place to escape when they start sending in tear gas grenades. If you ever found yourself in one, smear baby oil or Vaseline on your face and wrap a wet towel or t-shirt around. 6. Offenses involving children are frowned upon, even if consensual. There was this one guy, first-timer like myself, who had apparently given substances to a 15-year-old girl, and they did it. We're sitting in the day room, and he's telling us this like it's something to brag about, and assuredly it got everyone's attention. There were 2 other guys he shared his cell with, both having come down from prison for an added charge. After retiring to our cells, we hear a yell and a scuffle. Turns out the man in question was getting his own comeuppance in non-consensual relations. The entire cell block was cheering this on. The raucous eventually recedes and then silence. Slowly, the smell of feces just permeates throughout the block. The guy had the unspeakable act committed against him, and from what I heard, he stayed under his bunk until the next shower day when he rushed out of his cell begging the guards for help. The food was inhumane. No identifiable meat, plus everything had to be able to be eaten with a spoon because they weren't about to hand out forks and knives. Fun few days. Yep, a family member of mine was in jail for a couple of years for carrying green herb. Don't ask, he was in there way too long and the whole situation was super messed up. He said one of the worst things was the food. They had to eat some mushy Bologna stuff that made him gag when he even talks about it. He said they saw a starving cat outside once and they put the Bologna out for it to eat. The cat smelled it, shook its head in obvious disgust, and ran away. Holy crap, I thought they were about to eat the cat. I was sent to a woman's prison for about 5 years, and there was a girl in there who was famous for getting high on crystal while babysitting an 8-year-old and then killed the kid. Another one that I found disturbing was a girl who threw her newborn into the trash after she went into labor at home. I mean, you hear about this kind of stuff all the time and it's messed up, but then to be surrounded by people who've actually done it is freaking nuts. Also, it was heartbreaking to see mothers getting visits from their young children. Always tears from both parties because mummy still can't come home. A lot of these women were actually good people who just made stupid mistakes. What's the most embarrassing thing a parent has done to you? For those who didn't grow up in a time where you shared a phone with multiple extensions with your parents, consider yourselves lucky. For those who did, me. Hi, it's Kerry. I was wondering if you were going to the mall tomorrow. Girl I liked.
Yeah, I think so. It's Saturday, so I usually go with my friends.
Me. Well, if you're there, do you want to, meet up somewhere and have lunch? Girl.
Yeah, that sounds good. Where do you want to go?
Well, I was thinking… There's a click, some numbers dialing. Mum.
Hello?
Me yelling upstairs.
Mom, I'm on the phone!
Mum, through the phone.
Carrie, are you on the phone? I was calling my friend Reva. She's having some people over tomorrow, and I wanted to know if she wanted any potato salad.
Me yelling upstairs.
Mom, I'm on the phone with Susie. Get off!
Mom.
If you want, I can make a little extra so you can take it to judo. I know how you get tired after class. Oh, I hope I get to go this week. You look so handsome in your judo outfit.
Click. Me.
Sorry, Mom can be so embarrassing.
Mom.
I don't think she's there anymore, honey.
My dad was worse. I distinctly remember having a conversation with my best friends over the phone about a boy I liked, and my dad just chimed in with, "Oh, who's Jackson?" because he'd been listening on the other line the whole time. Had my first boyfriend in middle school and brought him home one time. At one point, my mum made him bring me my clean laundry. And by that, I mean a single pair of pink High School Musical underwear. I cried from embarrassment, but he was actually pretty cool about it and comforted me. Then, he cheated on me. My dad, influenced partly by Bad Boys 2, decided to mess with my boyfriend on my first date by acting like a real hard man. He filled a whiskey bottle with tea, then when he answered the door, he chugged the whole thing while staring my boyfriend down, then tried to break the bottle over his own head. The date was cancelled due to the hospital trip, and I became known as the girl with the bat crap insane father. "Don't concuss yourself this time" became the running joke once I was able to get a date again. That's incredible, and I want to know whether the father knew the risk involved or was just actually stupid enough to try and emulate something he'd seen on TV.
I want to know what the hospital people said. I know when my partner had an oral allergic reaction to my rats and his face started swelling up like those pics of dogs that ate bees, the health center staff was highly entertained. My butt was sitting there in the waiting room like, yes, he understands allergies. Yes, he knew he was allergic to them. Yes, he insisted on petting them. Yes, he had an oral allergic reaction to them because he was feeding them tiny pieces of gummy bear by pinching pieces off, then ate the rest of the gummy bear. Yes, I am questioning my assertion that he's very smart. When I was a senior in college, I was working a part-time job. They offered to make my current position full-time once I graduated. Before I got a chance to respond, my father found out and contacted my supervisor expressing concerns about the offer and the fact that I was still in college. How my father found out still boggles my mind, but when my supervisor told me that my dad called him, that was probably the most embarrassing thing either of my parents have ever done. I spoke to my parents a few months after it happened, and the only thing they considered wrong with the situation was that my supervisor told me my dad had called. Another story for your entertainment, when I was in 7th grade and went to a youth conference with my church. All the students got a free t-shirt and people were signing each other's names on them. This one girl signed mine, dotted the I with a heart and left her number. Well, I get home, my mum was doing my laundry and finds said number. Yep, you guessed it, my mother called the number and told the girl I needed to focus on my education and didn't have time for girls. After I submitted a job application to a manager when I was 16, my mother barged up and started going on and on about how I was really shy and not much of a people person. Yeah, that's what a manager wants to hear about an applicant for a customer service job. What the frick was she planning on doing? I don't see how anyone could think that was a good idea at all.
When I was 8 years old, I was obsessed with the new Charlie's Angels movies with Cameron Diaz, Lucy Liu, and Drew Barrymore. There's a scene in the movie where Drew is dressed in a patriotic jumpsuit at the NASCAR racetrack, and I really wanted to have that outfit for my Halloween costume. My mum is a costumer, and God bless her, made my costume from scratch to resemble Drew's jumpsuit. Well, as you can imagine, an 8-year-old girl does not have the cleavage to fill that jumpsuit out, so my mother decided to add a massive fake chest to this costume. I was mortified, and for some reason she could not take them out. So for Halloween that year, I had my arms crossed all of trick-or-treating. I still look back at the pictures from that year with deep anxiety. She Googles my boss's number, called him in his office, and asked him to put me on the phone. In his office. I was in a meeting with a client. I didn't answer her call on my cell phone in the middle of a workday. She wanted to gripe about my stepfather and wanted to talk now. No emergency or anything, she just wanted to talk and gave zero craps about the consequences of her actions, as per fricking usual. And that's the day my boss and pretty much the entire company lost respect for me, when the mum of their co-worker called him on his boss's office to talk about personal crap. A few months later, I resigned. There was nowhere to go in that place anymore. My mom did this to me when I was 18. She turned up at my job on my day off and talked to my boss about all her personal problems while being really clingy and trying to win his approval and start dating. I was on probation and the manager had no time for that crap, so I got a call to not come back. I had no idea that it had happened at the time, and it wasn't until a few weeks into looking for work that she decided to tell me about it. She had always done embarrassing crap like that my whole life, but that's when I realized she would mess up my chances at my livelihood and a decent career. So I never let her find out where I worked ever again. Not the name or anything that could be used to track it down. I wouldn't even tell my relatives specifics if I thought they might let it slip to her. I also didn't live with her, so she couldn't read my mail or pay stubs either. Is anyone else getting baffled at apparently how common it is for mums to completely ruin their children's ability to obtain and keep jobs? I can't believe that any of these people lacked the social intelligence to work out that it could only go negatively. Maybe not the most embarrassing, but certainly top 10. My mum went through this phase where she would talk during movies, specifically about what's going on in the movie. She was also terrible at paying attention to what was going on, so oftentimes what she was explaining was incorrect. In addition, she would try to talk over the movie. Mum would occasionally have to yell to make sure she was heard over the action scenes. Imagine, if you will, watching the aftermath of the stampede scene from The Lion King and the person next to you yelling, "Simba is sad because her dad died." My late mom got worse and worse about this as she got older, chatting through church services, movies, TV shows, using a loud voice in the otherwise quiet environments like public transportation, etc. Like, did part of that etiquette fall out of your brain at some point? You taught 2 kids how to act right and now you're off the hook? My sister's college graduation, my dad, my now husband, and I all ignored her, so she proceeded to talk everyone around us through the entire ceremony. Not horrible compared to a lot of these, but ugh. Unfortunately, this isn't a fun story. When I was 16, I had a big birthday party at our house. It was wonderful. I got to invite close to 30 friends, including new people from school. My dad made sure to have my favorite chocolate mousse cake as dessert. It turned into just a bunch of teenagers having a great time and talking. Then my mum was suddenly drunk. We never even noticed her drinking. She began microwaving slices of cheese on a paper plate and eating it with her fingers. Most of the kids didn't notice except for my BFF, who had some prior knowledge of her addiction. Kids began leaving, but not before my mum then began asking one of my friends, who was 15, about her intimate life and whether she was doing one of the other boys at the party. I thought I would die while standing and watching it happen. I had a male friend come over after school, and my best friend/neighbor was going to join soon after. They were dating at the time. Anyway, we get off the bus, started walking down the alleyway, and noticed my mum pulling out of the driveway. So we walked up to the car, and I asked where she's going. "Mum, we're heading to the grocery store. Do you need anything?" Me? No, I think I'm good, Mum." "Okay, well, I noticed the cucumber in your room was looking a bit soft, so I'll grab you another one." My friend looked like he was actually about to pee himself. Was there an actual cucumber, or was she just messing with you? Oh, she was definitely just fricking with me, but she did come home with a cucumber. I'm 21, and my mum still tries to order my steak for me. I ask for medium rare, and she says, "No, he'll have medium." And I say, "No, medium rare." And she goes, "Okay, whatever, that's fine." My 350-pound mother streaked in front of my boyfriend and my friends for $100. I was only 16, and that image still haunts me. My butthole of a stepdad thought it'd be funny to give my alcoholic mother money to mortify me. When I was 10 or so, I was struggling with being too big for kids' clothes and too skinny for most juniors' clothes. I was trying on this dress with a mesh area around the neck in the department store dressing room, and it was so big on me that my bosom literally showed through the mesh part that was supposed to be around my collarbones. Kids that age are moody, so I just lost it in frustration and started crying. My mom was like, "Oh, just let me see." But I didn't want her to see because that meant showing the whole fitting area, my whole chest. Finally, I showed her, and when she saw how upset I was, instead of comforting me, she decided to mimic me, fake crying in my voice and saying, "Oh my God, everyone can see my chest," and flashed everyone in the dressing room. Jeepers creepers, I came here for dad jokes and funny cringe moments, not actual childhood traumas. This kind of stuff will mess you up for a long time. Well, since we're committed now, here's another one. Sorry, this is a long one, but this will always stick with me until the day I die. So I really liked this one girl in high school, and I was always hoping we would talk someday, but I was a shy and quiet person. So one day we were all waiting around in the hall, and she started going off about her ex-boyfriend and stuff, and I was just there listening and watching. She looks at me and randomly says, "Hey, will you be my boyfriend?" My butt clenched so tight, but I was able to smoothly say, sure, why not? And she just laughed and said okay. So later in the day, I somehow gained the courage to ask her for her number since I'm her new BF. And she smiled and said she wasn't being serious, but would actually like to talk to me. She says she's been wanting to, but I just never asked. Holy crap, my mind was going absolutely insane around this time, so I took her number and walked away without saying anything, because I'm me and will say some stupid crap to screw this up. Fast forward to that night, I'm at home and was going to grab the telephone to give her a call, and my mum asked what I'm doing. I let her know I was calling a friend to talk for a few minutes, but she just said no. Didn't give me a reason, just said no and took the phone back. Now, my mum was going through bad menopause at the time, so she was really mean, unstable, and emotional person for most of my teenage years. Anyway, I asked her about it and she said, I'm not allowed to talk on the phone, but I wasn't in trouble, just wasn't allowed on it. So I did what any teenager does and waited until she fell asleep to go get the phone. So I give her a call and she says she's happy to hear from me and that we can finally talk without our friends bothering us. We talk about the teachers, friends, our schedules, and her general life, etc. I'm really just agreeing and laughing at this point because I'm in utter shock that I'm actually speaking with her. Well, I'm guessing my voice or laughter carried over to my mum's room, and she bursts through the door so hard that I jump and drop the phone. Loud as any person can be, "Why the frick are you on the phone? I told your stupid butt you can't use the phone! Why are you on the fricking phone?" I was not expecting that outburst at all, so I just said I was talking to a friend and asking them for help with homework. She says, "I don't give a crap. I told you not to be on the phone and now you're talking with your friends? Who the frick are you talking to so gosh damn late?" For some dumb reason, I gave her the girl's name and not like another male friend's. She was pretty much turning red at this point. "You don't listen to me and now you're on the phone with some B-word? I don't want no B-word calling our house. Hang up right now and tell that B-word don't ever call here again." She slams the door shut, and I look down to see that the phone is still connected. My heart dropped. She had heard the whole fricking thing. So I pick up the phone and sheepishly say, "Hello?" She only said, "Wow, that was, okay, see you later," and hung up. The next morning she avoided me like the plague. She never talked to me again after that, and we never spoke on the phone again. A part of my soul died that night, and I don't think it will ever be fully restored. Mine bought me a diary encouraging me to write in it. Later stole said diary, broke the lock off, forged a bunch of made-up crushes in there, and then read it aloud at the dinner table to humiliate me. My mother was not very kind. My parents, Southeast Asian, told one of my best friends, who's a girl and Caucasian, behind my back that if she was the same ethnicity as them, they would ask me to marry her. I'm sure they thought this would be very flattering. I found out later, and to this day, over a decade later, it still makes me cringe big time. A lot of people here are asking me if my parents are racist. They're not. This is a cultural thing. I've been married to my Caucasian wife for many years, and they love her. It was my 16th birthday, and my family went to a fancy Italian restaurant. The staff came over to sing happy birthday to me, and my dad started singing along loudly in a bad Italian opera kind of accent. We're not Italian. The staff was so stunned, and they just stopped singing. The other customers around us laughed and applauded, and the staff just walked away. I was mortified. When I was young, we had a pajama day at school, but I always just wore my boxers to sleep. Well, obviously, a kid can't show up to school in just underwear, but I was a little too dumb to understand that. Why my mum allowed me to go and even drove me there, I have no idea. It was the most embarrassing day of my life, and the school had to call my mum to come pick me up halfway through the day. I was in elementary school, but I can't remember if it was first or second grade. And the school didn't notice or care until halfway because I was eating lunch in the cafeteria and kids were staring at me. Some adult must have noticed them. I wore C-cup bras when I was 11 years old. My mum loved to loudly talk about them to anyone who would listen. Yeah, she's only 11. You wouldn't think it from the way she's filled out up top. Then I'd start crying from the humiliation and she'd tell me to lighten up. Seriously, half of these deserve a place in a video I did the other week. What's something harmless your parents did to you as a kid that really screwed you up as an adult? Some of these are equally as traumatizing. Telling everybody at Thanksgiving dinner at her boyfriend's house about my tween bout with anorexia. I didn't want to be there in the first place, and she just kept going on and on about how I had carrots for dinner for a year until I had to shout at her to stop. To her credit, she was immediately embarrassed when she realized what she was doing, and she apologized profusely. I was 13 and waiting for a ride with my sister and parents at Dollywood. Across the way, two very pretty girls about my age were smiling at me. I smiled back and acted all cool because I was a skater boy with skater hair, and my Vision streetwear and some shirt with a skull on it or something. It was working too. The girls whispered to each other and giggled, and one even waved at me. Then my mum reached her damn hand to my face and popped a pimple right there in public. The girls were aghast, I was humiliated, and I have never forgiven her. Oh, I have a Dollywood story too. We were with a church group and my parents were along with us because they wanted to extend our family vacation in the area. My dad was walking around with us, and I'd wanted to ride a ride. I couldn't find him after the ride, so I headed up to the front of the organized meeting place like we'd been told. My parents and most of the church group were there. My mom starts yelling at me for running off and spanks me in front of everyone. I was 13. When I was 5 or so, my preschool did a play based on Noah's Ark. It was a pre-K attached to a church. We were instructed that our costumes were supposed to be raincoats, rain boots, or umbrellas. I didn't have any of those things but begged my dad to get me at least one of them so I'd fit in and follow the guidelines. Fast forward, the night of the play, I'm frantically scanning the audience because my dad is always late. He finally shows up and brings me a life jacket. I had to stand up there with all the kids in their little raincoats in a life jacket. I was really embarrassed. Dad's defense was that I was the only kid who would have survived the flood. I can laugh now, but I sure wasn't laughing then. My father was a huge racist and used pejorative terms to describe other people. I knew about the words for African Americans, Chinese people, and Japanese people, so I never said them. Little me didn't know about the other words. I used one in class to answer a question my history teacher asked, and he was properly horrified. I was immediately removed from class, and my confused butt was grilled for hours about my word usage. I finally said I didn't know what I did wrong. My dad says it all the time to describe people from that country. They called my mum, and I had to go home. There was a shouting match between my parents and my dad's mother that night, and I was beaten soundly by my father. Mum made me call my 8th grade social studies teacher at home to ask if I could use him as a job reference. He lived with his parents still, and I asked for him by first name. He waited for me at my locker the next day to tell me to never phone his house again, parents' house, and never call him by his first name again. Didn't get the job either. Mum denies this ever happened and claims she would never demand I do something so strange. Don't you hate it when your parents become revisionist historians? I came home from school with head lice. Instead of telling the teacher, who would send a letter home to everyone without it specifically naming which child they noticed had lice, my mother rang every person in my class that she had the phone number of. She would have a chat with the parent, all, "Yeah, she has head lice, so you need to check your kid." I probably got it from someone in my class, and the whole class likely already had lice, but kids don't realize that, so the whole class were calling me dirty and saying that I'd infected them. It was horrible. I was hysterically crying while she called people. I didn't expect so many people to read this, so to address the concerns, she never did anything bad ever in my life except this, and she kept saying, "Don't be stupid, I'm just telling their mothers so they can sort it," and presumably didn't expect them to tell their 7 or 8-year-olds who it was. Clearly someone did because the whole class knew it was just me by the next day. Seems there's a lot of comments below with similar stories of adults having no clue how oddly shameful it is to have lice when you're little, which sucks, but kids will jump on anything to be mean sometimes. I have aggressive Crohn's that started showing up around 8th grade. My mum took me to all of my doctor appointments, which were all pretty embarrassing because no teenage boy wants their mum involved in their butt-related illness. One particular visit, we were about halfway through the appointment when she whipped out a Cool Whip tub. Turns out the following night I used the bathroom and it didn't all go down, so she thought it would be helpful to load up that in our poor people Tupperware and haul it into the doctor so he could look over it. He had the confused, "What am I supposed to do with poop in a Cool Whip tub?" face for a good 5 to 10 seconds, then politely dismissed it. Who would have thought there isn't any medical knowledge to be gained from fishing poop out of the toilet, refrigerating it overnight, and schlepping it up for an office visit? When I was a senior in high school, I had left the lights on in my truck all day and had to call my dad to come and jumpstart my car. Now, my father is 6'1" and has a very large belly. Mother Fricker rolls up in cloth shorts and no shirt to jumpstart my car. Then there was a time a few years earlier that my mother had him sent up to school to give me a sandwich before a football game. The man's boxers were longer than his shorts.
He's always there for you when you frick up though, isn't he? He'd give you the shirt off his back if he was wearing one.
This is actually something people have said about him. People who quit their jobs on the first day, what was your "I'm out of here" moment? I used to work at a craft store as a cashier, but quit when I moved. Ended up going back a couple of years later to make some extra cash, but this time in the framing department. During the interview, they swore up and down I would only ever be a backup cashier because I refused to have a full cashier shift. First shift after the interview is listed as framing, but I'm put on cash and told that actually most of my shifts would be cash since they'd found someone else for framing. I spent the next 6 hours giving everyone who came to my register 20% off everything and then never went back. Not technically first day, but second day. When I was 20 or so, I got hired to be a temporary floor member for Forever 21 during the holiday season. My training started a week before Black Friday, so the store was already kind of in chaos. On my first day of training, I walked in and the floor manager gave all the new hires a tour, showing us the facility and layout of the store. After this, I was assigned to a veteran floor member to shadow and get an idea of what my job was and what my duties would be. As soon as I was assigned, the manager dipped, never to be seen again. An hour and a half into my shift, my shadowee got an emergency family call and had to take off for a week. When this happened, I found some other floor manager and explained the situation and asked them who else I would shadow. The manager's response was, "Just do what you can by yourself, you'll be fine, everyone else is busy." Figured we'll be okay, so I'll try. I don't know if any of you have shopped in the women's section of Forever 21, but during seasonal sales they'll have multiple articles of clothing that all look exactly the same, with slight differences. Example, a white cardigan with 4 buttons that looked literally the same as a white cardigan with 5 buttons. The best part was these different items were often placed in completely separate parts of the store, and it was the job of the dressing room to return the unpurchased items to the correct section so the employees could put them back on the shelves. Well, these employees fricking sucked, and I didn't know if they were part of my section or not, so I'd spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to find where they'd go before realizing, wait, this isn't even my section. I've checked literally every rack. So I'd put it back on the sorting rack and moved to the next item. More than 50% of the stuff I was told to reshelf wasn't my section. I just did as best as I could and got ready for my next miserable day. The next day I come in and the store manager pulls me to her office and told me how slow I was the day before, and if I want to keep working there, I need to be very fast. I explained my lack of training and unfamiliarity with the store, and she told me if I didn't know where the clothes were in sections, I should come in on my free time and memorize where stuff was at. I spent the rest of my shift putting clothes in random fricking places, then never came in for a third shift. Frick that place and frick their management. Nothing as satisfying as hearing a person do what we've all wanted to do at times, flipping off the manager for their unreasonable bullcrap and leaving. My first internship was at a Brazilian teen detention center. It's akin to a prison, but Brazilian law has some distinctions between crimes committed while as an adult or a teenager. Teens go through socio-educational measures. I was walking through a courtyard with my supervisor when some doctors came running, flailing their arms and screaming while officers came running from the opposite direction. I get pulled by my supervisor who just tells me to run back to our office. These teens, as young as 12, had escaped their block. A few minutes later, an officer comes knocking on doors and the officers and yelling for everyone to run outside because a fire had broken out. Some of the teens had set mattresses on fire in their cells. I didn't really nope out, my teacher did. She hadn't even been there that day, so I was forced by the university to choose another place to intern at. Oh well. I was 17 and working precast concrete. Refused to use a rusted-to-crap ladder. Supervisor called me a wuss, got up 7 rungs before his foot went through a rung, heard his foot snap as he fell. I called an ambulance and walked to my car in the parking lot. Wasn't exactly the first day, but I didn't show up after the second shift. It was rather a popular cafe chain in my country. I was hired to work in the kitchen as a cook along with another senior cook. Let's put aside the fact that I had zero cooking knowledge whatsoever. The senior cook was leaving the kitchen every 5 minutes to smoke. I was just there alone, in the kitchen. Orders are printing fast and I'm standing there not sure what to do first. And the waitress comes over yelling at me to cook stuff I don't have any business cooking, definitely not on my own. Later on, the senior cook told me they had at least 2 rats running around the kitchen. Showed me they pooped on a plate. I never came back and I'm glad the place got shut down. On the first day of working at Amazon warehouses, the managers broke down to everyone how a 15-minute break works there. Walking to the bathroom is 2.5 minutes, 10 minutes of actual break, and then 2.5 minutes to go back to your stations. It took me 2.5 minutes to walk to my car, and I took a forever break. Summer job working for a landscape architect. Got to the job site and he asked me to dig a hole in some rocky dirt. I asked for a shovel. He didn't have one. I asked for a hand spade. He didn't have one either. He told me to just dig a hole with my bare hands and then drove off to another site, leaving me completely alone. I dug for a little bit and then said, "Frick this," and left. Had the job specified that I needed to supply my own tools, I could have, but it didn't, and I wasn't going to work for someone that expected folk to dig through hard, rocky soil with their hands.
Huh? Sounds like he sucks at communicating. Those bosses are the worst.
I'd say he's got bigger fish to fry than communication. Guy runs a hole-digging business with no shovels. I noped out of an interview one time, thanked them at the end and said it wasn't for me. Those interviewing, management-level folks, started arguing with each other in front of me during the interview. I figured if this is the vibe at the management level, then I sure as heck don't want to be your employee. Answered an ad in the paper, this was in the mid-90s, for what seemed to be an office job making sales calls when I was in college. Did a phone interview and was called back for an in-person interview. When I go to the interview, I'm led into a room with about 50 other people and a small stage at the front of the room. We're all somewhat confused as to what's going on. Finally, a guy gets on the stage and informs us that we've been selected for the opportunity to sell Cutco. Me and 2/3 of the rest stood up and walked out. Anytime I see more than a dozen people for a job interview, I just nope the frick right out. If it's not door-to-door sales paid only on commission, it's some multi-level marketing crap. I wish some job interviews would be more forthcoming about that. Some places have outright lied to me. Legitimate response. I think that last person's rule about the number of applicants is a fairly good one to go by. I just wish I'd walked away from my first bullcrap door-to-door job. I was a cashier at Lowe's during college for less than a full day. I made it through the multiple-day training, but there was so much stupid crap going on, I almost thought I was on a hidden camera show. All the employees complained about how hard they had to work while simultaneously not getting enough hours. Nobody understood why they were hiring like 4 new people. I was one of those 4. Turns out it's because they were progressing through an indecent conduct complaint that required restructuring of the store and firing some of the employees. This was known to HR and explained to new hires, against company policy, but it wasn't known to the employees. Apparently some of whom still worked there, including the fricking person doing the training. She was really inappropriate and said not to worry about the indecent conduct stuff and that everything would go back to normal soon enough and that we wouldn't have to be so uptight. They fired her the day before I started, along with one of the cashiers who trained me. She also offered me terrible guidance for the application process. They were looking for a part-time help, and 2 of the 3 days they needed help on, I had off from school. I told them I couldn't work nights most nights, but if they needed daytime help, it had to be on one of those days. She said if I was too restrictive, they wouldn't keep me on, and lied to my boss about my availability to make me even more attractive than I already was. Wink! And told me to schmooze them a bit and I'd make it further. She said in the end it wouldn't impact anything and I'd get those days. My first week's schedule, I was working mornings every day that I was in school and I wasn't given any hours on my days off. Aside from the fact that I was given 2 times the hours the position called for, when other employees were shorted, my work schedule was literally impossible to consolidate with my school schedule. I only went to work on my first day to tell them that I was quitting and that their application process was a fricking mess. They couldn't figure out how so much went wrong, and then they asked who trained me and everything made sense. They thanked me for at least showing up to quit, unlike the other 3 they hired, who had just stopped returning their calls and no-showed on their first days. A long time ago, not long after getting my papers as a chef, I had an interview at a hotel for a position in the kitchen. The executive chef and I chatted in his office for about 20 minutes. At the time, I remember him coming off as very arrogant, which is quite common in this field. I didn't think much of it at the time, as the pay was decent and the shift was what I wanted. As I was leaving his office, I turned to leave through the dining room, the way I'd come, which was closed at the time. It was another hour or so before service started, and he says to me, "No, not that way. Go through the kitchen. You're not good enough to go through the dining room." I was so surprised by what he said. I just did what he asked without a word. Later on, after I'd got home, I phoned him up and said that after having a close look, I decided that his menu wasn't good enough and that I wouldn't be accepting his offer. Restaurant. Swept under my station when we were closing. Giant brown pile came out with the broom from under the lowboy fridge. The pile then began to scatter. It was hundreds of roaches. Never returned. My first ever job. I was 13 and would be delivering phone books from the back of a van through people's letterboxes. So I'd be in the back of the van with the phone books, and there was an older guy slowly driving while I went back and forth to the van/houses with the books. At one point, the van was getting empty, so there was more space to move around, and we'd finished the delivery in the streets that we were paid to deliver in, and he drove to another. While driving there, he drove, let's say, aggressively, and I fell inside the back where the books were. I wasn't sitting in a seat as the van had no seats in the back. As I put my hand out to steady myself, I accidentally laid it across a portable radio that had its antenna extended, but the antenna was also broken halfway and razor sharp. I sliced the palm of my hand clean open 3 to 4 inches. I can only describe what I saw as gruesome. I said to pull the van over and I needed help. He saw my hand and just threw me a plastic bag, the kind you'd get at a supermarket, and told me to wrap my hand in it. Then continued with the deliveries. At least he delivered the remaining books by himself. I should have been taken to a hospital or at least home to my parents, and I quit after that and never showed up again. As you can imagine, my parents were quite angry at him. Well, as awful as my first after-school delivery job was, it wasn't that bad, and you have my sympathy. At least when I got injured, they would just schedule a later delivery for me. I got hired at a very small knockoff dollar store in an old, failing mall. The owner was foreign with a very thick accent. He told me I'd get $6 an hour, but neglected to mention it was under the table. I spent about an hour stocking the very overly cluttered shelves before I was told to get more chips out of the back storage area. I walk back there and there's about a dozen men sitting on boxes all crammed into a small back room. I asked where the chips were and these guys all glared at me. They started speaking in another language and rapidly motioned towards me. Then one guy got up and asked what I needed. I told him I was supposed to get a box of chips, and he got a box out of the pile and handed it to me. The entire time, these guys are all staring at me. Everything back there looked shady as all hell, and it was very uncomfortable. A while later, I had to use the restroom, which was also in the back. These guys all just wordlessly glared at me while I went into the woman's restroom. While I was in the restroom, someone tried to open the door. I was the only woman there. The owner told me he wanted me to come back that night late in the evening well after the mall closed. I didn't show up. I came in the next morning and lied about why I couldn't work there. He still gave me the few bucks from what little time I did work. I don't know what in the heck that guy had going on there, and I didn't want to find out. Restaurant line chef. Worked a 12-hour shift and was given 2 breaks of about 10 to 15 minutes each. Burned my hand numerous times because they gave me plates that came right from the oven, and never said a word. End of the shift, I told the head chef I was done. He called me soft and said I was the 3rd person to quit on him after a day. I said, maybe it's the way you treat people. Funny how people think it's not their problem when many people quit working with them. Restaurant owners never seem to get this. I was a hostess at a restaurant like this for about a year. We could never hold on to the kitchen staff because they were worked to the bone and barely paid. It affected the whole restaurant. Dishwashers were either swamped or had nothing to do because the tickets were too backed up. Busboys were the same. The servers got crap tips because the food was so slow and the managers were constantly comping food and getting chewed out about long waiting times. And even the hosts had long waits and sections full of empty tables we couldn't sit because we were trying to let the kitchen catch up. Then the idiot owner would come in, sit everyone on my list, and go yell at the kitchen for being slow. We were lucky if new guys lasted a week back then. Restaurant work is a joke. I've been in New York City restaurants on and off for about 10 years. They all turn to crap or just start as bullcrap right from the get-go. My last job was as a sous chef. I'll never work the line again. 2 times. Once I applied for and got a telemarketing job. I didn't know what it entailed. After an hour, I knew it was a terrible fit. Auto-dialing people during their dinners, trying to sell them stuff they didn't want, and reading a horrible script while sitting in a soulless grey cubicle. I got up, went to the manager, apologized, and said it wasn't a good fit for me. He seemed understanding. Another time, I attended a Make Easy Money at This Job seminar, and turns out it was selling knives door to door. I don't know if I technically quit or just noped out at the end of it. I answered an ad for a babysitting job. I was already working on a casual basis, but it was sporadic, so I thought some after-hours babysitting would be welcome extra cash. The couple were both in the military and proceeded to tell me that I would be staying in the spare room and looking after their 6-month-old child around the clock, as well as doing the housework. I would have 1 day off every 2 weeks. They said it's cash in hand, so I could sign on to the dole, unemployment benefit, to make up the rest of the money. I left on the spot. They wanted a live-in housemaid and a nanny, not a babysitter, and they were not able to pay for one. Why they thought it was basically up to me to illegally collect the dole and subsidize them, I don't know. Applied for a job at my longtime favorite restaurant, celebrated my birthday there every year. Owner asks me to come in for basically a tryout, as I communicated I was looking at other job possibilities as well. I come in and they just stick me on dishwasher for an hour. No biggie. Then the dishwasher doesn't show up, so the kitchen manager asks me to stay on their lunch rush. Says I'll get paid for the hours. I do. Kitchen staff was nice, so I was happy to help out, even though I figured I'd be taking a different job. I fill out a time card at the end of the shift and tell the manager I probably wouldn't be back. He understands and thanks me for the help. Fast forward a couple of weeks and he tells me to email the owner after I ask him if I should pick up my measly paycheck. I do, and she basically tells me to frick off over text. Tells me it was staging and that she had told me I wouldn't be paid. I respond that I understand, but that I stayed for an extra 3 hours which I was told I'd be paid for. She stops responding, and I decide I want to be petty over the $40, so I get the state labor department involved. Dude goes in there and makes her pay me for the hours, including the first staging hour. Couple weeks later, I got my $40, never went back to that restaurant. In hindsight, I'm very glad I did this, and sharing the story with others in my city, I learned this practice was very common with local restaurants. Hopefully, others learn to stand up for their labor too from my small experience. Secondly, this restaurant closed down a couple of weeks after I got that paycheck. The owner made a long-winded complaint on the Facebook page about how the food culture had changed in the city and her restaurant didn't fit in anymore. Total bullcrap, they were always popular. Most people theorized the terrible mismanagement and employee abuse caught up to her. It's interesting. This story is from about 5 years ago, and I stopped my long restaurant career about 7 years ago. I wonder if there's been any significant transformation in restaurant culture, or if it's still the same exploitative crap at different date. Maybe you modern waiters and chefs can let me know in the comments. More hospo stories to follow. I was a waitress, the only waitress at a just-opened diner. The boss didn't have me sign any paperwork, everything was under the table. But that wasn't what made me quit at the end of the night. In order to get me where he wanted me to go, he would pinch my skirt at the upper thigh, not quite the butt, but very close, and pull me around like it was a leash. Needed me in the kitchen? Rather than call me, he would come out, pinch my skirt, and pull me to the kitchen. Needed me at the cash machine? Again, come over to wherever I was. Didn't matter if I was serving a customer, and he would grab my skirt to pull me. That act, in itself, made some customers uncomfortable. Mind you, one couple left almost 50% tip at the end, but I think it was more out of pity and embarrassment on my behalf. I was supposed to come in the next day, but I called that night and said the job wasn't for me. I came in a couple of days later to turn in my apron, and he just took a wad of cash out of his pocket and paid me then and there. God, he was creepy. I think it was a smart move to quit. When the microwave in the lunchroom was coin activated. This is like when I made my patrons pay money to use the bathrooms at my roller coaster park when the ticket prices weren't cutting it. Amazing move. Had an orientation for an alarm company. Next day, the manager calls and says don't worry about going into the office and to meet at Planet Hollywood. They like to get to know the employees better over lunch. Next day, I go into the office and another employee who I had not met says, "You must be Steve." I was like, huh? They responded, "Light-skinned, pretty boy," is how the manager described me. In the same conversation, I found out no one else had ever been invited for a get-to-know-you lunch. And I was out. Got what was supposed to be a prestigious political internship that came with a security clearance and everything. Found out at orientation that the part-time internship was really 40 to 60 hours unpaid, and that no intern had gone on to work with the organization and weren't really given a leg up for other federal posts. We were supposed to facilitate meetings with heads of state, coordinate conferences, and assist the actual employees with composing published research papers for which we would not be credited. They were definitely drinking their own Kool-Aid, so I bounced right on out of there. I was hired to be a waitress, which has a lower hourly wage due to tips. The entire shift they had me wash dishes in the sink, but paid me waitress wages. A few months later, the restaurant was investigated for another of fraudulent activities. I interviewed for a professional marketing assistant and got the job straight away. I was under the impression that I would be an assistant to the man I was interviewed by. When I showed up for my first day, the same waiting room I was in the previous day was full of people. I quickly learned that we were all hired and I would be a door-to-door salesperson selling some pretty useless crap. I spent my entire day inside a Starbucks applying for other jobs and went home, got paid, but never came back. I wasn't the person, but I was training a new guy at a movie theater. A customer asked for extra butter. She was nice and normal. Not a mean or rude customer, the kind I would pay to handle all day long. He puts the popcorn tub down, says, "I'm going to the bathroom," takes off his apron and walks out the front door and never came back. Maybe he crapped his pants and couldn't bear the thought of returning.
My brother got fired because he crapped his pants on the third day on the floor and had to go home early. They said they fired him because he wasn't upselling enough at the register. But if you get fired on your second day on register for not trying to get people to sign up for credit cards and the day before you crap your pants, you got fired for crapping your pants. If you make 10,000 shoes, you're a shoemaker. If you fly 10,000 hours, you're a pilot. If you crap one pair of pants, you're the pant crapper. How have you observed or used body language to your own advantage? The most amazing occurrence of body language I've witnessed was a friend back in high school that could control our group of friends. Whenever we were standing in a circle and he wanted to speak, he would simply take a step or two towards the middle. This would cause everyone to quiet down, effectively giving him room to speak uninterrupted. We didn't catch on for a while, but the way he was able to perform it so subtly was amazing. I believe this has to do with personal space and how we instinctively react to an incoming presence. Similar simple ways to control a group. If you're eating dinner and everyone is done and just chatting, simply stand up. People usually follow suit almost unconsciously. Alternately, if you're a group or milling around but should be heading somewhere, just start walking. Generally, everyone will follow. Sometimes I have to tag a friend or two to start walking with me if part of the group is not paying attention, but once you get 3 or 4, the rest tend to follow. Anyone not following due to being engrossed in conversation will soon go, "Wait, where did everyone else go?" and chase after you. I do this a lot at crowded sci-fi and gaming conventions when my group needs to be at a panel or meet up. Next up, we have a rather long story about an individual who seems to have mastered this particular subject matter and used it fully to his own advantage. I once sat next to a guy in my college class that was unreal with things like this. For instance, once before class, while we were waiting outside the room for the professor to arrive, he saw a pretty girl coming down the hall. Immediately, he goes, "I'm gonna go talk to her," but doesn't move. I'd always known the guy was suave beyond my years, so I'm really curious as to what his icebreaker is going to be and waiting to see this in action. Being a bit unsure of myself in my early college years, this was like Houdini personally giving me a behind-the-scenes look at a magic trick. The girl was very pretty but had sort of a sour look on her face. In my head, I'm like, no pickup line in the world is cracking this iceberg. Then I watched the true master in action. My first mistake was ever assuming he needed an icebreaker in the first place. He didn't simply start a conversation by saying something, or anything. He used his body posture to make her start the conversation with him. As nonchalantly as you could get, he pulls out his cell phone and pretends to look down at it. When she's about 3 feet away from us while still glancing down, he takes a half step in her direction, in her path. In one smooth motion, he looks up, fakes a reaction of, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention," as he takes a half step back to make room for her and leans back against the wall. Her, apparently totally sold on his genuine surprised look and repositioning to make room for her. "Oh, thank you." Him, "Hey, no worries. Traffic these days." "Huh. Yeah, is that Professor X's cost accounting class?" Yeah, how did you know that? Are you an accounting major?" "Yeah, I'm in IA2 right now." How majors refer to intermediate accounting 2, meaning she was about 1 semester behind us in the course cycle. "Well, you'll do fine if you can handle IA2. It's more difficult than cost accounting is. The trick is to..." "Oh, really?" And the conversational small banter continues. He also told me later he already knew she was an accounting major by recognizing the book she was carrying when he first glanced up from his phone. Don't ask a question you don't already know the answer to in the first conversation, but people like to think they're being informative. This guy was full of these little insights, and how good he was on this bordered on socially manipulative. So yeah, body language is unbelievably powerful for how subtle it is. To answer some of the inquiries I'm getting about this story, I would say he was average looking on the whole, but he certainly knew how to carry himself, and he did dress nice as well. Sitting next to him can also confirm his cologne was on point. So I don't think he had any unnaturally good looks, but good posture, good dress, and a general clean, hygienic appearance will help maximize anybody's potential. And of course, he had that unmistakable aura of natural confidence. You could tell him his car just blew up, and the first thing he'd do was lean to the girl next to him and go, "Hey, I need to go car shopping. Want to come with me?" No, he wasn't even close to being creepy. That's what was so unreal about it. For the first few weeks, that was my thought as well. Nobody's this good without being a serious creep. Or, he does this just to bang chicks. Once again, my mistake. It was never about doing the deed with women. In fact, he never made any kind of comment like that whatsoever. No innuendos, no, "Bro, this chick is so hot." Nothing. He genuinely wanted to meet and get to know this girl to see if they had any chemistry. That simple. And no, he wasn't really a pickup artist.
No, he didn't have any hack to the system. There was no good lines. The guy wasn't trying to teach me anything, although he ended up teaching me quite a bit. This guy just was. I don't think he could teach it even if he really wanted to. What I learned was merely through observation. The beauty of it was how subtle it was, and I wonder if he even knew all of it consciously, or if it was just ingrained subconsciously. For example, when she first said, "Oh, thank you," we were both leaning against the hall wall and she was passing in front of us. Simple enough. By the time the conversation progressed, we were in more of a triangle-type shape, more inclusive, but I never even saw the fricker move. Don't recall anything of us shifting positions whatsoever, but there we were. And only after going over it in my head 1,000 times did I even recognize that it happened, let alone know how it might have made her feel more welcomed. So subtle. But there in the moment, I find it hard to believe that it was part of a calculated endeavor on his part. And I know it wasn't on mine. Like I said, he just was. If I learned one thing from this guy, it would be this. There's a saying in the running world that if you want to be fast, don't try and run fast, try and run easy. And then, when you can run easy, try and run light on your feet. Don't worry, if you can run easy and light on your feet, you will be fast. Same concept applies. If you want to be good at meeting women, don't try and be good at meeting women, put some effort into yourself. Dress well, shower, exercise, these things matter. Learn to get to know all kinds of people of both genders because you want to get to know them. And do it till it's easy for you. Don't worry, if you can put some effort into yourself and getting to know people is easy, you will meet women. And there we have it, folks, the man who just apparently lives and breathes this stuff. I'm still not entirely sure he was all that, and maybe the writer of the story is just a little bit infatuated with him themselves, but there we go. To me, the absolutely most important thing I've learned about body language is that it had to be taken into context. What else they're doing, what they're talking about, who they're talking to, where they are, etc. When starting to observe, it's easy to take one gesture or posture or expression and go, "Hey, look, crossed arms. That equals defensiveness." Or whatever, but that's only one part of an equation. If body language is an actual language, then crossed arms is just one word. You can't figure out what someone is saying by just looking at one word. You've got to look at the whole sentence. I often catch myself mirroring the actions of people I'm interested in, so I guess that's something. Agreed, it's a circular paradox. I can never work out if I'm mirroring them or they're mirroring me. Either way, it definitely indicates interest. During a job interview, sit in the same posture as your interviewer is sitting in. It gives the impression that you're feeling the same way that they are. "I don't think you're right for this job." "My thoughts exactly, sir." Both get up and leave. In a quiet room full of people, for example, a classroom, scream as loud as you can in your mind. Anyone that winces is a mind reader. You should watch out for them. "Wow, I'm surprised I'd come this far in the thread to get to the important stuff. I just did it, and someone wouldn't stop staring at me for 5 minutes. Confirmed." Not exactly body language in the traditional sense, but I've sold 6 or 7 houses in my time, and I've always known which viewer would put on an offer by the fact that they 1. Used the bathroom, and 2. Altered something. It's held true every time. I stage my houses very carefully, and I know when anything has been moved, or used, or changed, and would tell my husband to expect a call from the agent that evening. My guess is that the folks are subconsciously taking possession or marking territory. Ah yes, christening the toilet is vital when moving into a new home. Failing that, peeing your initials into the master bedroom carpet is an acceptable substitute. When it comes to non-verbal communication, you don't just like for one particular behavior, you're looking for clusters, and even then, nothing is ever 100% true. Also, you have to take into consideration different cultures have different mores. What's considered acceptable in one culture might not be in another. In a group conversation, people will tend to look at the person they're most comfortable with the most. Self-touching is often a sign a person is nervous or anxious. Lip biting is often a sign of arousal. Pupil dilation is a sign that a person is excited, and possibly on substances. I think the changes in body language are more significant than anything else. For example, and I've had this pointed out to me, I normally stand with a pretty straight posture, ex-figure skater here. But when I start talking to someone else I think is cute, I quite obviously arch my back and shift my weight entirely onto one hip. This might be a normal posture for someone else, but the shift is what makes it significant. In conclusion, don't trust static body posture. Someone could have just been chilling like that. Watch how their body position changes when you approach. That's possibly a valid hypothesis. I think I definitely shift and shuffle a bit more when I'm anxious or uncomfortable about something or someone, so maybe this post author knows what they're talking about. Speaking from someone who used to be in car sales, some guys look for the wiggle during test drives. That's shifting in the seat while driving to get more comfortable. Probably something to do with taking mental ownership of the vehicle. Hands in pockets or arms crossed equals defensive. Needs more rapport building before pitching. Some people are so intimidated about walking into a dealership that they prefer to walk the lot after business hours at night. That's fine too. We had a computer programmer so overly stimulated that we recognized that and organized a quiet room for him to sit down and discuss his options. He bought the car and thanked us. Some things like handshakes are culturally specific. I always greeted someone with a firm handshake and look in the eye. Clients from India generally give limp shakes because that's more usual if they shake at all. Chinese and Japanese prefer no bodily contact in business. A quick bow or nod usually suffices. For farmers, whoever speaks first loses. There was a guy who regularly came in to look around and all these sales guys tried to pitch him. He eventually bought from the one guy who kept his mouth shut and ignored him. Not sure how that works. Always know who the boss is. Do not assume it's the man or the woman based on who's talking the most, based on hetero norms. Both parties need to be engaged. Very low chance of a deal without the spouse, regardless of what someone says about being able to make a decision. Work and loss prevention. This one, among many, many others, is almost always true. When a person has made the decision to shoplift and is about to conceal, they look like they're peeing in the pool. Every time. LP is all about body language. Or they're like me and they're paranoid that they changed their mind about that thing they were going to buy and put it back, but then picked it up again, and now everyone thinks I'm shoplifting, but I swear I'm not. And no, I do not need assistance, and I'm a normal average customer, just going about my casual business in your fine establishment. I don't want to go to prison. I won't make it in prison. Shaking someone's hand can make you memorable. This is just something I've observed, so I'm not passing it off as a general truth. When I meet someone new in a casual setting, a friend of a friend, someone's co-worker, someone's family member, etc., a person who acknowledges your existence and makes their way over to shake your hand will have an immediate impact on me over someone who just smiles and nods or waves or whatever. I feel more comfortable with someone who makes the initiative to shake your hand for whatever the reasons may be. I'm much more likely to approach someone whose hand I've shaken to learn more about them at some point in the night. This very much goes in the business world as well. I know it's common knowledge to shake someone's hand when you meet them first time in a business setting, but if someone approaches you to shake your hand while they're leaving, they are far more memorable in my mind. It gives me a sense of belonging, knowing that someone thought about me in particular before leaving a place or setting and had to make their way over to let me know they're leaving. This also works with customer-client relationships. If a customer shakes my hand after a transaction is completed, I'll remember them and may give them some sort of incentives or discounts next time I see them. Americans love a firm handshake, but the same custom is not necessarily true in other countries. It can also be a male thing, with some men using a crushing handshake and holding it for a long time, making it a move of dominance. Lyndon Johnson used to hold the handshake and then grab the lapel of the other man's suit with his other hand, and then stand very close until he got the answer he wanted. Pediatrician here. Girls as young as 9 to 12 will start twirling or playing with their hair if they are attracted to someone. It's pretty adorable to see it develop. This doesn't have to be a romantic attraction, you weirdos. It can happen when they see someone doing something impressive, talking to someone important, etc. This behavior continues but can take on many different patterns, like pushing their hair forward. Some guys take this as a sign that the girl is covering up, but it's probably closer to, "Hey, look at my pretty hair." Take a look at the audience during The Voice or whatever country has got talent, etc. Look at the audience when a slightly cute boy sings decent or better. It's hilarious to watch. It's like a collective sploosh among the girls ranging from 12 to 32. Well, now I can't unread this ever, and now if I ever watch a show with a studio audience, the people I'm watching with are going to wonder why I burst out laughing when a good-looking man walks on stage and there is a camera shot to the audience. When one person grooms another during social interaction, "Oh, you've got some lint on your shoulder, let me just..." She or he is being subconsciously affectionate to that other person and welcoming him or her into the pack. I mean family. Like monkeys picking each other's nits. I had a teacher that was a former cop. He pointed out that a person in a normal state of mind will swing their arms slightly while they move or walk. Angry people have a tendency to hold their arms at their sides and not move them. Always true? Maybe not. Often true? Sure. The same basic rule applies here, and also implies that you're trying to hide something.